Hello, and welcome to the Modernizing Operating Models podcast, where we unpack topics of organization design from the front line. In this episode, we will be joined by a guest who will share why a collaborative method to change the way the business operates was exactly what was needed. We will cover what that journey for this business leader looked like, how it was to shift from relying on industry benchmarks and best practices to navigating the unknown and becoming unique as a business. What were the challenges? What were the advantages in this particular case? Tune in to hear more about it from our guest and genuinely one of the best leaders I collaborated with, Liz. All right, let's dive in. Welcome, Liz. Welcome to our podcast. Very excited to have this conversation.
Thank you.
I feel like we went from seeing each other nearly like a few times a week, then all of a sudden nothing because our project finished, and now it's really nice to see you again.
Yeah, I think I saw you more than some of my own family at certain points. It's a distinct pleasure.
Well, there you go. So to the audience, this makes it very clear that Liz has been collaborating with On the Mark, which is why we're having this conversation to really go a bit deeper in understanding what your journey has been in your organization, which is a global publisher. Perhaps you can give us a little bit of a background on what your role is in that organization and also what drove you to sort of say, listen, we need to change our operating model in a different way that we've done before.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Anissa. So I'm Senior Vice President of a large publishing organization, and I'm responsible for a number of different areas within that. So we look after editorial aspects of the publications that we run. We're in academic publishing. Mostly journals. I look after some of the operational aspects, but not all of them, and look after major client relationships as well. There's more to it than that, but that's the broad nutshell. What do we publish? Why do we publish it? And who do we help publish in the process? It's about 800 people in total. We are spread globally with large bases in the US, in the UK, in Germany, in China, and then smaller groups in Australia, Japan, and various other parts of mainland Europe as well. And the reason we embarked on this process was because I took over this team around about 2 years ago now, a little over 2 years ago. And I'd worked in the organization for quite a long time. And I had certain thoughts about the way that this part of the organization operated, but I hadn't been in it for quite some years. So I wanted to understand it more deeply. We were always committed to some of our core strengths, like how we work with these external partners that we're heavily engaged with and have been forever. But our industry was going through an awful lot of disruptive change. And it was unclear to me that we were looking after, as best as we possibly could against this backdrop of significant change, the needs of the partners that we were working for and the individual needs of people that we are publishing for all the way through the process. And so it seemed like a really good time to just start to question not what we do, but the way in which we were doing it and how we organized ourselves to do it.
Yeah. And then you embarked on the journey of, okay, so how are we going to organize ourselves in what it is that we do? And you consciously chose to do it in a way where it was kind of unknown what the outcome would be. Tell us a bit about that and why you chose to do that.
I chose to do that in part because I've typically had fairly strong opinions with a capital O about things that I think need to change. And while I'm sometimes persuaded by others that the outcome that I'm aiming for may not be the right one, or it might need some adjustment, I thought with something this sizable, it really did require a different kind of thinking, and an open mind and more brains than I would bring to the table on my own or just with a small group of people as well. publishing of this form has been around for centuries. There's a lot about it that has changed, but the pace of change has picked up so much that it felt to me like it was really time to do a root and branch review, not just of how we were organized, but what it is we were doing and why we were doing it in certain ways as well, and what that meant for the way that we had to organize ourselves.
Yeah, makes sense. And what we're also curious about is to what extent were there specific areas in your operating model that you identified as actually a unique factor compared to the industry or the norms in the publishing industry?
Yeah, there were really a couple of core things. So one of them is this strength that I've mentioned that we've had for a very long time, which is partnering with external organizations to publish on their behalf. These contracts, for those who are outside publishing, are pretty long-lived. They're typically 5 years at a time. Some might be a bit shorter, some might be a bit longer. In some cases, we can be working with an organization that has a professional staff who look after areas of this publishing activity themselves as well, and we provide services to them that they don't have in-house. In other cases, we pretty much look after it as if it were our own firstborn child, right through from conception through to delivery and so on. So this partnership ethos has always been really critical to us, and really important and really central. And that wasn't going to change. We're firmly committed to these external partnerships in the way that we publish and organize ourselves. But at the same time, we have this disruptive backdrop. And we had made a number of very deliberate moves over the course of the past 5 years, which is a pretty short time frame in academic publishing, which I think surprised a number of people in the industry that the organization I work for was taking some pretty seismic steps forward. And that was because we could see the trajectory that the industry was taking, or that some of our core stakeholder groups wanted to take. We had partnered with them as well in a different kind of way. We didn't always agree, but we sat and listened to what they wanted. And they were creating an awful lot of change, not only for us, but for the customers that we've been serving as well.
Yeah.
And so we needed to marry those two things together, that very core traditional ethos of service together with the highly disruptive changes we were experiencing. And that also meant that we needed a much more coherent and consistent operational underpinning to the whole as well. So there's a whole lot of swirl going on in the way in which we do things and why we were doing things, but the people we exist to serve are unchanged. So that was a huge part of it.
I think you also hit one of the challenges that we encountered in that process when we were running workshops together, which was this sort of navigating or sort of balancing the importance of what you described with the partners and the customer facing side of things, and marrying that up with what you can deliver from an operations perspective.
Yeah.
So that was one of the challenges. Can you describe what other challenges came up and how this process perhaps really helped mitigate those?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the challenges I knew existed actually before we embarked on this process, and I think it's probably true of many, many organizations. I knew it. I didn't quite know how it manifested itself, and it came out quite clearly in some of our earlier sessions, was the kind of silos that we'd got ourselves in.
Yeah.
People kind of working towards common goals, no question about it, but doing it in very specific ways that didn't necessarily meld together across the teams as effectively as it might have done. And that's not because of any ill intent on anyone's part or any kind of selfish ways of working. It's purely because everyone was so busy making sure that they were doing the best that they could in their own functions. What we found as we went through this process was that the concept, I think, that you introduced us to, of not just chucking things over the fence, but making sure there are proper handoffs between the way we set ourselves up and the way that we see the whole, it's not a process as such, but the whole value chain of what we do and how that becomes a continuum rather than separate phases was really important. So the kind of theoretical side of it helped us a great deal. And then in the process itself, using workshops where we were able to mix people up outside of the normal teams that they would work in, was really pivotal. I remember overhearing someone from one team say to another group, I know you always told us that you found this problematic and a real challenge for you, but I didn't realize why until now. And now I understand it. And I can see exactly why that's been such a bone of contention for us. And that kind of step forward was really important because it got everyone in the room thinking, that could be me listening to another group, or that could
Yeah.
be someone else telling me that same thing. And that made a very big difference to the way the whole organization tried to solve, all the representatives in the room tried to solve some of our common challenges, even if they were in a very different part of the organization.
Yeah. And how is it to lead your team to continuously, put that energy in, to show up, to be prepared, and to do the work? Because there was a lot of work needed to do this, not just in terms of capacity, but also being there, present.
It is a lot of work. We are very lucky where I work in that people really do value the opportunity to do things differently or to do different and new things. So there was a lot of enthusiasm from people when they were asked to participate in this project in the first place. We traditionally also don't do this particular, haven't done in the past, this sort of very inclusive style of developing the way in which we're going to work and how we're going to deliver on it. So that felt, I think, to people who were invited to participate like a quite rewarding thing in and of its own right. Because it was new and it was different, people showed up highly motivated, very keen to participate, very keen to learn. We live in quite an academic environment as well, so the kind of theoretical and the practical really well for our groups. The challenge came for us, and this was an internally imposed constraint, when we couldn't come in person as much as we liked, and we had to switch to an online environment. And because we're global, that meant many people spending many hours in front of screens trying to wrestle with some really challenging topics. And that was on us. That wasn't on the process. And that was a harder time to maintain, not so much the focus. I think people were very focused on what they needed to do, but a little bit of the joy went out of the room. There was a lot of fun in the process as well when we were able to get together. It was hard work.
Yeah.
But it was really fun, and there were very clear outcomes after every workshop as well. So people clearly felt each step of the way like we were making meaningful progress, and that was super important.
When you talk about the clear outcomes that came out of that, can you talk to us a little bit about what the impact was of this process for your business?
We've ended up with a more radical change than I anticipated at the outset. I genuinely didn't have any preformed opinions as to what the outcome would be. I had some thoughts and some perspectives. And now we're living in the new model. The changes that we've created are really quite substantial. And it wasn't radical change for the sake of it. This has very definitely been a highly thoughtful process, with an awful lot of data to back it, as well as creative thinking. And so the outcome, I am really confident, is where we need to be headed. We're still bedding in, but we're on the right path in my view. And that was a big surprise to me, that it was quite as radical as it was at the end of the process. But it fits. We've been on that pathway of continued emerging change, and we had several aha moments through the process where you really start to see it knitting together, and you can kind of feel it as well, even if it's all on flip charts and post-it notes and PowerPoints at the end.
Yeah, I think you also highlighted one bit that's quite crucial, a crucial factor to make it successful, which is that you didn't have any predetermined solution. You were I remember very well from the first conversations that you were completely open to jump into something not knowing what that would look like, what the process would look like, but equally what the outcome would look like, and therefore what the impact would be on your business. So I think yeah, for me, from OTM's perspective, that was just really the right way to collaborate with as well.
It was part of the joy of the process. And I've mentioned this to you before, but when we were looking around for a partner to work with on this, we interviewed a variety of different groups, and with some, not all, I felt like we would go through a process and come out of the process in the same form as a company that does something really very different to us would have come out of it. And I didn't get that impression with On the Mark. And while I maybe had some preconceptions at the beginning, they certainly weren't fully formed. And when I realized that what we would get here was about the process and really understanding the outcomes we wanted for the business and the drivers that would get us there, and then you figure out how you're organized around that, that just made a whole lot more sense to me. You focused on what it really is that you need the business to do and how you want people to feel about it, and then the consequences, the shape of the organization, rather than starting with that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And on that, that process was also meant to create commitment, or to sort of enable commitment from people in the room to then go out in the organization and lead those bits, because they were part of the process and they've contributed in building that organization. Can you talk a bit about what that did once OTM left for the implementation?
Yeah, absolutely. So it helped a great deal. So we had people who were able to sit in meetings with the much broader team that we work with here and talk authentically about their own experience of having been in the room, and about the changes that we went through, and about the thought processes that we had, where we knew we were 100% on the right track, and where we still had some scope to think differently about how the precise endpoint, or the precise way in which certain things might work. And I genuinely think that having people being able to give their own perspective on it from experience, as opposed to having read an FAQ, is a much more valuable place to be. It also means that we have now got those much tighter relationships across the different teams. You inevitably have to form teams and structures and have boundaries. But when people have been involved in a really intense process for, a period over multiple months, working closely together, thinking about the future of the organization they work for and the people in it, all of the people in it, it's a kind of really strong bonding experience. And we can see that the way that those teams interact with one another and those individuals who are involved in the process has been great. We didn't really, and this was accidental rather than deliberate, the people who became our implementation leads were not, I think with one exception, embedded in the full process.
Yeah.
And what really impressed me was the way that those implementation leads actually really kind of took on board the process that we had been through, figured out how to help us move forward from the point that they got involved, and really became a core part of the team as well. Every step of the way, as we included more people in the process, they kind of got absorbed into it very, very quickly.
Yeah, totally. I echo that 100%. It was a bit of a back and forth, but I think that's just part of it, because the advantage of going with multiple people with a diagonal representation of your organization, it requires more conversation, it requires more alignment, it requires so much more time than if you sit with 5 to 10 people in a room.
Yeah.
I mean, you can figure it out in a day, for example, or 2 days.
But then what you
what's
end up
the impact?
moving pieces on a chessboard, as opposed to figuring out whether you're playing chess or Monopoly or whatever.
Exactly. It's not going to fundamentally change your organization, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
So how would you describe, if you focus on the behaviors, what was really important from, for example, leadership style behaviors necessary to really drive and enable this redesign in this collaborative way?
I think openness and transparency, as far as you can be transparent. Certainly, we didn't go out there on day one to all of the organization and say, guess what, we're going to change everything up and we're going to spend several months thinking about it. So leave us to get on with it for a while and we'll come
Yeah.
ready. But you cannot be in a room with multiple people trying to work towards a common answer and kind of hold information in yourself that you're not willing to share or divulge or whatever. You just kind of have to and should participate fully in the process, which is what I did and what my direct reports then and now did as well. Both sets were involved. So I think that's really important. It was really important that we shared what we were doing with other leaders responsible for different functional areas in the business that I work for as well, so that we weren't just creating our own new environment and then suddenly going to unleash it on people who had a vested interest in what we do and the way we work and vice versa. So including them in some of our readouts was pivotal as well. So again, it was about openness and about sharing. And the openness piece extends very much to going in with an open mind in the first place. I don't think this would be a very time-consuming way to deliver a preconceived opinion. So that was absolutely essential.
Yeah. And how would you describe, how is your business doing right now that you've gone through this process, a few months in, the implementation, sort of transition planning is what you've been through as well, steps in preparation for implementation, clear on what you need from your leaders in your organization to pursue this. Where are you now?
We are still in a stage where we're bedding in for sure, and it's mixed. One of the phrases I heard from someone in the team who wasn't directly involved in the project, which I actually really liked, this was from a couple of months ago, was it's something along the lines of, it feels pretty messy right now and a bit difficult, but I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that when we get there, it's going to be good. So we are well on the way. Some people and some teams are further ahead than others, as well as the changes that we needed to make internally. As I mentioned more than once, there's a lot of disruption in our industry, and we need to make some changes, not just to the ways in which we work, but the systems, the processes, the workflows, and the tools that we're dependent on as well. And some of those things have not gone at the same pace as our organizational design. So I think we, to some degree, imagined ourselves or built ourselves for the future in which some of those processes are fully in motion, and they are not yet. So we have a bit of pain around the fact that we've designed for a future we haven't yet reached. So we have to fix those things. And we had set out originally with our implementation to say, we haven't solved everything. We've designed 75, 80% of the way we're going to work. There's some white space. Everyone is empowered to help us figure out how we solve for that. There's probably a couple of areas in which we said, you know what, this isn't getting solved in the way that we had thought it might. And that is probably because we've designed for a future we're not quite at yet. And so therefore the leadership team needs to step in and figure out how to close this gap for the interim and get rid of some of that pain. But we can also see some really good new cross-team collaborations happening.
Oh, amazing.
Where people are operating in their different functions, their new functions, but driving to a common goal with either a common partner or a common set of priorities in mind. So I can see that already. Our performance, I believe, is improving. There are some environmental and business factors to that as well. But we've got much clearer accountabilities at the individual level. And while there isn't quite enough space yet to fully dial them all, I can see that for a lot of people, it's beginning to improve. If anyone from the team is watching this, you know where the rub points are. we're working on some of those. There will still be room for improvement after that, and that's where we want everyone to contribute.
Yeah, 100%. I think yeah, thanks for also just, again, this goes back to your previous point about being open, right?
Mm-hmm.
And being real and authentic about these things. Part of this process as well is that people get to find out that there's a different way perhaps to collaborate and to problem solve as well, and develop these problem solving skills.
Yeah.
So in a way, they're prepared to deal with these things, whatever it is coming from the environment or from within the organization that needs to be sorted out. So I think that's, yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's
that
good.
chucking it over the fence concept has really stuck with me, and I am seeing a lot less of it within our own team, but I also now spot it much more clearly when it's happening
Yeah.
elsewhere, and kind of start to call people out on it. Maybe not using those precise words, but pushing a little bit more than I might
Yeah,
have
and I think it's
in the
good
past.
because it needs to also be clear, and things also need to be celebrated.
Yeah.
But also there needs to be some growth and learning, and for that you need to be transparent. Otherwise, no one will learn about it. So
Yeah.
yeah, makes sense. What based on your experience and everything you've shared, what recommendation or advice would you offer other organizations or the business leaders considering their operating model and how to go about it?
Go with the process, right? The way I saw those workshops, especially the earlier ones, they were for us, and I don't know if it's always the same, typically 3-day workshops. And
Yeah.
day one, my mind was routinely blown. It's like, I don't know what is going on here. It's fun, but I have no idea where this is going. Day two, things would start to make sense, but I would genuinely have no idea at the beginning of day two of how we were going to progress through the things that were going to begin to make sense. And day three, we would get to some real solid outcomes every single time without fail. So for us, that process really worked. And even when you feel like you have no idea what's going on, don't worry, there genuinely is a plan underneath it. And I have every confidence that it will work. I think I've mentioned it more than once, the being open to letting the process take you in places you may not have previously thought about, or that maybe even run directly contrary to something that you were thinking about, is really important. Also, very much no hierarchy in the room. Everyone has an equal voice. Everyone has an equal say.
How did you facilitate that from your role? If that makes sense.
We there was a couple of things. So first of all, one of the very first sessions in the first workshop was, what behaviors do we want to be a core part of these workshops going forward?
Yeah.
And that was a group exercise that everyone contributed to. And when we committed to those behaviors, we all committed to them equally. There were also times where I didn't necessarily need to be in some of the specific conversations, but I just sat back and observed rather than tried to interfere.
Yeah.
And I have a kind of fairly natural tendency to interfere, so that was a bit difficult. But just sitting and watching the way that the groups were interacting and what they were coming up with, and then every now and again just asking a few questions here and there, was really helpful. We did not, in any way that I recall, ask for, now we're going to present to this level of people or that level of person. It was a collective effort right from the beginning, and it stayed that way.
Yeah.
We didn't go all the way into our organization, and that was partly practical, the number of people we could actually get together in a room at any one time, and also because of the need to have people in the room who could represent a broad sort of spectrum of activity or workflows or understanding of the business or whatever. We may have gone a little bit deeper and a little bit wider I think we would have done if we hadn't been constrained to some more virtual sessions later in the process.
So I'm curious about what you would recommend someone who's listening who, for example, completely aligns to everything you said, however, is not in the same position as yourself. But really wants to convince their leaders that a collaborative way would be helpful for sustainable operating model, if that makes sense. What recommendation do you have for those people?
It's an interesting question. One of the things I hadn't anticipated when we set out on the process was that I started out thinking we need an organization who can help us restructure and potentially think differently about the way we've traditionally restructured. What we got very early on in our understanding of the process that OTM operates is you don't even think about structure until you've thought about the way in which you work and what your objectives are and what your goals and your priorities are. So I guess my recommendation would be the way in which this worked for us, and I was lucky, I didn't have to do a big pitch to anyone about why it should be this way, is that we focused on a process that followed what the business needed, the way in which we thought we had to deliver on that, and what the priorities were for us as an organization to be able to deliver it. And the organizational structure was a consequence of the business priorities as opposed to the organizational structure being the be all and end all. So our priorities in terms of what we had to deliver for the business were right there from day one and guided a huge amount of the process. And then we adapted our organization to be able to deliver on that. So if it's business priorities, first and foremost, that was there. One of the business priorities for us was to be a really good place to work that offered people really good career pathways and learning and development opportunities. We had 3 core pillars. That was one of the 3. So a business priority doesn't have to be just about making money or whatever else, or making more widgets. It can be about the people that we're all here to serve as well. And yeah, that was it. Business outcomes first. How we get there came as a consequence.
Yeah. So shifting the conversation not to structure, or shifting the conversation from structure to what are we here to do for as an organization.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. As a final question, what is it that excites you about the future now that you've gone through this journey? What excites you about the future of your organization?
I think there are several things. One of the things I did know early on was I didn't know where we needed to get to, but I did know that we were asking a large number of our people to try to do too much. Our world used to be much simpler. And so we had people effectively managing the whole of an individual product. And that was asking too much of most people. They either weren't able to deliver on all of it because there just wasn't enough time in the day, or because some issues were getting so complex, they were specializing in some of those, and then you'd later find out something else would come and creep up behind you. So one of the things we've done is created teams that have real expertise in different areas of our business, which means the depth of what they can understand and the value that they bring to our organization, but also the organizations they work for, the individuals who publish their materials with us, and so on. The value they add to that is immeasurable, but it also means they have to work together to be greater than the sum of the parts. And so I see a lot of scope for collaboration, but deep expertise at the same time. And that also offers scope for individuals to move around between teams as well. So we've created horizontal as well as vertical opportunities for career development and expanding on individual knowledge and so on. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that become a bigger part of our future. I'm looking forward to having clearer, more focused outcomes as well, that are closely tied to the accountabilities and the expertise that the team is developing. And I'm looking forward. In fact, one of the very first meetings I had with one of our external partners, just after we introduced the model, was incredibly enthusiastic about the change. We've had some challenges as well, to be entirely transparent again. But one of those very first ones was he could see what all the different members of that group were bringing to the table and how it created real value to him as one of our partners. And that was fantastic to hear, especially.
Yeah, amazing.
I want to hit some more of that. That's what I'd like.
But that's amazing, because that's why you do this work to begin with, right?
It is.
That's the whole point. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've got more authors publishing with us than we had
Amazing.
before this process as well, which partly environmental factors, but partly as well, I think, because of the degree of focus that we're able
Yeah.
to increasingly bring to our work as well.
Even
So
if it's just environmental, it's still like now you're set up
we're set
to
up to
serve,
deal with it,
yeah, to
to
serve
manage it
them,
better.
right? Yeah, exactly. Incredible. So many things to look forward to then.
Indeed, there are many.
Nice. Liz, it was such a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your journey, your story, and the wisdoms. Yeah, really, really amazing to have collaborated with you and
Thank
your
you for
team as well.
thank you for having me. Honestly, the process was a pleasure. It was a huge amount of work, but it was so well worth it. And I would do it again, but I might give myself a year off it for now.
Yeah, it was good. It was great fun. Thanks, Liz.
It was great fun. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform and tune in next time for another engaging conversation on everything operating model and org design. Take care.